A long time ago, there was a king who was famous for his wisdom throughout the entire land. Nothing was hidden from him, and it seemed as if news of even the most secret things reached him through the air. However, he had a strange habit. Every day after dinner, when the table was cleared and no one else was around, a loyal servant had to bring him one more dish. This dish was always covered, and even the servant didn't know what was in it. No one else knew either, because the king never uncovered it to eat until he was completely alone. This routine went on for a long time until one day, the servant who brought the dish was so curious that he couldn't resist taking the dish to his room. After carefully locking the door, he lifted the cover and saw a white snake lying on the dish. When he saw it, he couldn't resist the temptation to taste it, so he cut off a small piece and put it into his mouth. As soon as it touched his tongue, he heard a strange whispering sound coming from outside his window. He went to listen and realized it was the sparrows chattering to each other and sharing all kinds of things they had seen in the fields and woods. Eating the snake had given him the ability to understand the language of animals. Now it happened that on the same day the queen lost her most beautiful ring, and suspicion of stealing it fell on this loyal servant because he was allowed to go everywhere. The king ordered the servant to be brought before him and threatened him with harsh words, saying that unless he could identify the thief by the next day, he himself would be considered guilty and executed. The servant insisted he was innocent, but no one believed him. In his distress and fear, he went down into the courtyard and thought deeply. There, he noticed some ducks sitting by a brook, resting quietly. While they were smoothing their feathers with their bills, they were having a private conversation. The servant stood by and listened. The ducks were talking about all the places they had been waddling around that morning and what good food they had found. Then, one duck said in a worried tone, "Something is weighing heavily in my stomach. While I was eating quickly, I swallowed a ring that was lying under the queen's window." The servant immediately grabbed the duck, took it to the kitchen and told the cook, "Here's a nice duck, roast it for dinner." "Yes," said the cook, weighing the duck in his hand, "she has certainly fattened herself up and has been waiting long enough to be roasted." As the cook prepared the duck for dinner, he found the ring inside it. The servant was now able to prove his innocence easily, and the king, wanting to make up for the mistake, allowed him to ask for a favor and promised him the best position in the court he could wish for. The servant declined everything and only asked for a horse and some money for traveling, as he wanted to see the world and explore a little. When his request was granted, he set off on his journey. One day he came to a pond where he saw 3 fish caught in the reeds, gasping for water. Although it is said that fish are mute, he heard them complaining that they were going to die miserably. Since he had a kind heart, he got off his horse and put the 3 trapped fish back into the water. They wriggled with joy, stuck their heads out, and called to him, "We will remember you and repay you for saving us." He continued riding, and after a while he thought he heard a voice coming from the sand under his feet. He listened closely and heard an ant king complaining, "Why can't people with their clumsy animals avoid stepping on us? That stupid horse with its heavy hooves has been crushing my people without mercy." So he steered his horse onto a side path, and the ant king called out to him, "We will remember you. One good turn deserves another." The path led him into a forest, and there he saw 2 old ravens standing by their nest, throwing out their young ones. "Out with you, you lazy, good-for-nothing creatures," they shouted. "We can't feed you anymore. You're big enough now to fend for yourselves." But the poor young ravens lay on the ground, flapping their wings and crying, "Oh, how helpless we are. We have to take care of ourselves, but we can't fly. What can we do except lie here and starve?" So the kind young man climbed down and gave them the food he had brought for his own lunch. The young ravens hopped over to the food, ate until they were full, and then cried, "We will remember you. One good turn deserves another." After traveling a long way, he came to a large city. There was a lot of noise and a big crowd in the streets, and a man rode up on horseback, shouting loudly, "The king's daughter wants a husband, but anyone who wishes to marry her must complete a difficult task, and if he fails, he will lose his life." Many had tried already, but without success. However, when the young man saw the king's daughter, he was so struck by her beauty that he forgot all the danger and went to the king to declare himself a suitor. He was then led to the sea where a gold ring was thrown in front of him. The king ordered him to retrieve the ring from the bottom of the sea and warned, "If you come back without it, you will be thrown in again and again until you drown in the waves." The people felt sorry for the handsome young man. Then they left, leaving him alone by the sea. He stood on the shore thinking about what to do when suddenly he saw 3 fish swimming towards him. They were the very fish whose lives he had saved. The fish in the middle held a mussel in its mouth, which it placed at the young man's feet. When he picked it up and opened it, there was the gold ring inside the shell. Overjoyed, he took it to the king, expecting to receive the promised reward. But when the proud princess saw that he wasn't of noble birth like her, she scorned him and demanded he perform another task. She went into the garden and with her own hands scattered 10 sacks of millet seed on the grass. Then she said, "By tomorrow morning at sunrise, all these seeds must be gathered up, and not a single one should be missing." The young man sat down in the garden and wondered how he could possibly complete this task, but he couldn't think of anything. He sat there sadly, waiting for dawn, when he would be led to his death. But as soon as the first rays of the sun shone into the garden, he saw all 10 sacks standing side by side, completely full, with not a single seed missing. The ant king had come during the night with thousands and thousands of ants, and the grateful creatures had worked hard to gather all the millet seeds into the sacks. Soon after, the king's daughter came down to the garden and was amazed to see that the young man had completed the task she had set for him. But she still couldn't let go of her pride and said, "Even though he has completed both tasks, he won't be my husband until he brings me an apple from the tree of life." The young man didn't know where the tree of life was, but he set out and was willing to keep going as long as he could, even though he had no hope of finding it. After traveling through 3 kingdoms, he came one evening to a forest and lay down under a tree to sleep. He heard a rustling in the branches, and a golden apple fell into his hand. At the same time, 3 ravens flew down, perched on his knee, and said, "We are the 3 young ravens you saved from starving. When we grew up and heard you were looking for the golden apple, we flew over the sea to the end of the world, where the tree of life stands, and brought you the apple." Full of joy, the young man headed home and took the golden apple to the king's beautiful daughter, who had no more excuses. They cut the apple of life in half and ate it together, and then her heart was filled with love for him. And they lived happily together in peace for a very long time.